So we're going to roll through this thing because I have far too many slides for an hour. So I'm going to be skipping through things. There's a lot of fun stuff in here that shows research we've done and how we came to understand things. I think it's more important, though, that you understand these things as to know, where it came from and what we did. I do have this little drive going around, a copy of my PowerPoint. You guys, if you have a laptop on you, you're welcome to copy it over so you've got it. So we're just going to roll in here, and basically we're going to talk about how real reading works, how we come to read, what happens when reading fails, and what to do about it. Okay? Let's just jump in here. The 3 types of dyslexia we're going to talk about today are all in developmental populations, which means it's with kids. And so these are the types you're most apt to run into. Phonological dyslexia, surface dyslexia, and neglect dyslexia. We're going to talk about all 3. Prior to that, I'm just going to talk real quickly about how do we read. And this is going to be real simple and real fast. Basically, a good reader, when you go to look at a word and you look at it, you recognize it visually and it goes straight from print to meaning. Okay? That's called a direct route. You're looking at it, you recognize it visually, you get the meaning from the word. If that doesn't work out for you because you've never seen it before or you're so young you haven't been exposed to it yet, then you go left to right and you start sounding it out. So your attention goes to the left of the word and you start applying sounding out rules. Okay? So that's pretty much what happens. You look at it, you either get it or you don't, and then you go to the left and you start sounding it out. Sounds pretty simple. Believe it or not, these 2 ways of reading are very different from each other and involve very different parts of the brain. Okay? Here an example I've got here. In Japanese, there's kanji versus kana. There are 2 different ways of reading in Japanese. Kanji involves logographic reading. So that first picture there, you see there's a picture that means stop. In English, it would just be like seeing a sign, the shape of a stop sign and knowing that means stop. That's logographic reading. It's a picture, and one picture that means one thing, a word. In Japanese, there are symbols like that mean one word. In Japanese over here, like similar to English, you can also have words where you have to put syllables together in order to read. So in the second slide over here, that little symbol means ya, as in Yahoo. So I would need a new symbol for the who part, and they would put it together. Just like in the English language, you might put SH together, sh, with O-op for shop. Okay? In Japanese, you can read either way. You can get brain damage and lose the ability to read one way and maintain the ability to read the other way. That's because these are very different parts of the brain. So when I say you first look at the word and you see if you got it, and if you didn't get it, you go to the left and you start sounding it out. It sounds very simple. These are dramatically different ways of reading, entirely different regions of the brain. And when one of those routes goes wrong, when something goes wrong, it leads to either phonological dyslexia or surface dyslexia. And we're going to talk about what those are and how to treat them. These are a lot of words that are all speaking about the same thing. And I'm just putting them up here so you know that when you're reading research about reading and dyslexia, you will see all these different kinds of words, but they're all talking about the same thing. On the left, they're talking about a direct way of reading, which is basically print to meaning. And on the right, all those words are talking about indirect way, when you're applying sounding out rules. So when you don't recognize it holistically, you go to the left, you start to sound it out. These are the words you will see in the research that mean reading indirectly. Okay, so direct, indirect, lexical, non-lexical. That means there's a lookup, like in a dictionary in your brain, there's a visual memory. That's lexical. If the visual memory of that word is not there, it's non-lexical. It's not there. You have to sound it out. Kanji, as you know, is a picture. Kana is sounding out. Logographic is a picture. Piecemeal is putting many different visuals together in order to read. Irregular words versus non-words. An irregular word is a word like yacht. It doesn't follow regular sounding out rules. So if you were to say yacht, if you were to sound it out, you'd say yatched or yacked or something, right? So they're irregular. They don't follow rules. The beauty about using irregular words, we can't sound them out. If you do, you're going to say them wrong. So because you can't sound them out, we know you have to read them visually. You have to read it as a whole in order to get it. So we know if you can't read irregular words, you're surface dyslexic because you're not getting the visual representation of that word. Versus non-words, you give someone a fake word, it's not real, so obviously they don't have a lookup of it in their brain. It's fake. So when you read a fake word, just like coming to a word you've never seen before, that's unfamiliar to you, you go to the left and you start sounding it out. So in the literature, you'll see irregular words versus non-words. Typically, and a lot of schools do this, and you'll see this when you look at the testing from your school, they use non-words to determine phonological dyslexia. You're going to learn something very interesting today, and that is that you can have poor non-word reading and no phonological problem at all. So it's very important. Testing is very important. We're going to talk about how you get poor non-word reading from a visual deficit. Very important. But anyway, generally in the literature, you've got irregular words versus non-words, which are looking at a whole word way of reading versus a sounding out way of reading. Non-regularization, that's like yacht, doesn't follow the regular rules. Regularization, rules like table, they follow a rule. You sound them out the same way all the time. Familiar, you're going to have a look-up strategy of a word. If it's familiar, obviously, if you've seen it a lot, you develop a good memory for that letter orders of that word. If it's unfamiliar, you're going to have to sound it out. In parallel means you're processing all those letters at the same time of the word. Left to right, obviously you're not perceiving that word as a whole, so you're going to process it in a piecemeal left to right fashion. And at the bottom here, surface versus phonological dyslexia just means if you have a problem with this way of reading, you're surface dyslexic. If you have a problem with this way of reading, you're referred to as phonological dyslexic. The word surface actually originated from acquired literature many, many years ago, even though they're in developmental populations. The difference was some people had deep dyslexia, which means people with brain injury, they'd look at a word and they wouldn't know what it means, but they could read it. And other people couldn't read it, and they refer to that as deep versus surface. The word just stuck, and it's still there. And we refer to that. It just means when you don't have a visual representation of all the letters in that word, you can't recognize them as a whole. It's referred to as surface dyslexia, the surface aspects of the word itself, as opposed to meaning. So let's talk about phonological dyslexia first. So obviously they have poor nonword reading. We know that. But in addition to having poor nonword reading, they also have to have something wrong with the auditory system. So that's why testing is important. They can have a hearing deficit. If you can't hear, you're not going to be able to learn the sounding out rules. People who are deaf learn holistically. You can have a speech perception problem. Your hearing can be absolutely fine, but you don't perceive speech properly. And we're going to talk about that. And if you don't perceive speech properly, you're not going to know what sounds to apply to the symbols. Someone can point to BA on a page and say, that's ba. And then they point to PA on a page and and they say, that's ba. That's what you hear. You hear ba for both of them. You're going to think BA and PA are both ba. Kids get things confused like g and k, d and t, b and p. They're too close. They're too similar, and a lot of kids can't tell the difference, even though their hearing is fine. We'll talk about how that comes to be because the auditory system processes speech different than any other sound in human species. Phonemic awareness, an example, when you're testing phonological dyslexics, poor non-word readers generally, for what's going on with these kids, you do tests like you can say the word bat. Say it again, but don't say b. And they have to say at. Or a hard one would be say the word remember. Say it again, but don't say mem. That's a hard one. But basically, they have to know where speech sounds start and end. And these are the types of tests that you can give them to see if they know how to parse speech sounds properly. If they don't, it's highly likely that their poor non-word reading, their fake word reading, is due to the fact that there's something wrong with the auditory system that's not allowing them to learn the sounding out rules. You can also give rhyming tasks, auditory memory tasks, all kinds of things to figure out why they're not reading fake words or new words. Here's an example of how speech perception works and how it can go wrong in a phonological dyslexic. Here's a good reader. This is an MEG study that we did. We present two tones. We present them really quickly and we see what happens. So we presented two tones 200 milliseconds apart. This is what it looks like in a normal brain. So you get one peak of activation in the auditory cortex. So I present boop. That's pretty much it. You see boop. You wait 200 seconds. You do it again. Boop. Look, they got it. It's exactly 200 milliseconds apart. You see that? Because the acoustic properties of the stimuli are exactly mapped by this technology, which is pretty cool. So anyway, we know that it works in good readers. Here's a good reader hearing two tones, okay, 200 milliseconds apart. Here's a dyslexic, phonological, I should say, dyslexic hearing one tone and not the other tone. This is because the hearing system has cells that turn on and off really quickly in the brain. The speech perception system, I should say. But these are tones. But when you're hearing speech, sounds change so fast, right? Like, let me give you an example. Everybody say, ba. Now say, pa. When you say ba, and we're going to show you a slide on these in a second, there's what's called the place of articulation, the b, and there's the voice onset, ah, ba. There's only 20 milliseconds between this and this, ba. The brain can't hear the difference. I'm going to show you a slide in a second where ba is just one peak. You can't hear ba, you hear ba. But when you say pa, say pa. There's 60 milliseconds between p and pa. The brain can hear the difference. So when I give a good reader ba's and pa's, I see one peak for ba and I see two peaks for pa. And I see them exactly 60 milliseconds apart because there's 60 milliseconds between this and this. You give them to phonological dyslexics, they don't hear it. They can't hear the difference. Because the cells have to go on and off really quickly in your hearing system to hear all those little subtle changes. And you have to really, what we call it, stretching out the formants. You have to stretch out the time between this and this until they eventually hear both. So when you're telling a kid and you're teaching them how to read, this makes the ba sound, this makes the pa sound, they don't know what you're talking about. They just hear ba for everything. Okay, so anyway, here's an example where the presence of the first tone has masked their hearing of the next tone. So what happens with these cells is they turn on and they stay on. They don't turn on and off quickly. So their cells turn on, stay on, and now they're not getting the next one because it's not refreshing quick enough. So here is a a good reader to the speech sound ba. Speech sound pa. You see two peaks? They're 60 milliseconds apart, right? Here's a phonological dyslexic ba. Nothing for pa. I don't know why. It's just the way it goes. That is just one example, and we're going to be flying through these, of how the auditory system can impact your ability to read non-words. How phonological dyslexic, by nature of the word phono, means hearing. And in this case, speech perception, which means you can get your hearing tested and it's all good to go, but you get your speech perception test, or you test phonemic awareness, and you see that things aren't as they seem. Audiology labs are still not able or not advanced enough to test for these things, which I know is crazy, but that's the way it goes. Now we're going to flip real quick to surface dyslexia, and we can talk more about phonological later at the end if there's time. Surface dyslexia, they have good non-word reading. In fact, they sound everything out. So you're going to find their non-word reading is amazing. They're really good at applying all these sounding out rules because they don't see the words as wholes at all. So all they can do is go to the left and keep sounding them out all the time. They're really slow readers, you can imagine. If you're always applying the sounding out rules because you can't recognize words as wholes, slow. So surface dyslexics usually have fluency problems. They're slow readers, and they're reading bit by bit by bit. And it's because they cannot see the word as a whole. They can't look at all. I shouldn't say see. They're not attending, and you'll understand this in a second, but they're not attending to all of the letters in the word at the same time. And when you can't process all those letters in parallel, you can't come to get visual representations of the words. So they always go to the left, and they just keep sounding everything out all the time. This is referred to as surface dyslexia. So these are the areas of difficulty you might see in testing: visual perception, visual memory, visual sequencing, parallel attention, so being able to attend to things at the same time in space. I'm going to be showing you studies that tap into these kinds of things, but anyway, visual tracking. How to fix the problem. So, okay, we know that there are two ways of reading. You can read holistically, where you get visual representations of the word, or you can sound things out. So what do we do to fix the problem? Well, you can focus on what's broken, right? So let's say someone isn't sounding words out. Well, we can do what I said before. You can stretch out these sounds, and hopefully they'll start to hear them, right? And you can do that. There aren't any tools available in the general education world, but in science there are. You can get a hold of them. So we can do what's called stretch out the formants, so they can tell the difference between ba and pa. There's something called fast forward by the Scientific Learning Corporation. It's like fast forward, but forward being an O for word. They have a program called Fast Forward for Language that does stuff like this, stretches out the sounds for phonological dyslexics. You can give kids that, and you can hope it gets better, right? But the question is, do you want to focus on what they do right, or do you want to focus on what they do wrong? And this, as educators, we think about this a lot. And there is no fast answer, and this is why we have to really think. And you're going to apply all this in your own life, how you wish to apply it. But as a general rule, I think grade 3 or less, focus on what's wrong in addition to what's right. And then after that, leave it alone, focus on their strengths, and go from there. Because a lot of these things I'm going to show you later don't get better. They can't get better. And even when they do get better, it does not trickle over to their reading. And I'll show you why. So the saying, beat a dead horse. If it's not working well, use their strengths, and you can do that. So with a phonological dyslexic, if they're not hearing stuff well, go with whole word reading. They do that well, right? If a surface dyslexic isn't recognizing words as wholes, that's a little harder because they can sound everything out and it's slow going for them. So they need fluency exercises, how to speed things up, and we'll talk about how to do that. But okay, here are some examples of why working on what's broken isn't always a good idea. First of all, in the first year of life, when you're born and you're born into a culture, you're exposed to certain language sounds. Okay, so in the English language, we're exposed to English language sounds. If you were born in Italy, you'd be exposed to Italian sounds. During that first year of life, you hear all these sounds, and you start to expect to hear these types of sounds because you're exposed to them a lot. And something happens that's called pruning, which you may have heard of. It has to do with neurons pretty much going away. But you tend to not hear the sounds anymore that you've never been exposed to. So, you know, if you're Russian or German, you're used to hearing these sounds all the time. After the first year of life, if you were to then plop someone into an English language, they might not even be hearing those sounds because they're expecting a different sound. So by then it becomes this top-down expectation. You know, oh, did you say, I thought you said, you know. And it's very hard to get people to start to hear sounds they were never exposed to. They just don't expect to hear them. So having said that, trying to implement speech perception remediation programs in someone who just may never actually hear that sound anymore, depending on their age, is kind of a waste of time. I'm going to give you an example of a study we did, MEG, which is looking at brain activity, like the ba and pa studies I showed you a second ago. When you take, here's an example, when you take people who hear certain sounds the same in their own language, like Asians that might hear ra and la the same, when you present ra and la in an MEG setting to English-speaking people, you see very different brain activity. When you present ra and la to a lot of Asian populations, their brain activity looks exactly the same because they heard the same thing. So even though usually it maps the acoustic properties of the stimuli, the sound that you hear, not when you're older, not when you're an adult, because we're looking at the human cortex and we're looking at how you perceive the sounds. And by a certain age, you just perceive them as the same and there's nothing you can do about it. You can try to get them to see it, hear it differently, but it's tough and waste of time. I'm going to give you another example, improving speech perception in phonological dyslexic. So we put kids through that fast forward program. It's a program that allows them to hear sounds better, speech sounds better. Guess what? They all improved in it. They were ages 6 to 14 years old. They all got better at understanding the differences between speech sounds. When we tested their reading a year later, nothing correlated with their improvement in speech perception. And I believe the reason being is because by these ages, 6 to 14, they're doing what they do automatically. The brain is on autopilot, and the brain knows what it needs to do to learn. And when you have strengths, you're going to use those strengths. Your brain is going to do them automatically. And no matter what you do and how you teach someone, to try to get them to do something that doesn't come natural doesn't always work out very well. So we improved speech perception in children, and we improved phonemic awareness, and we did not improve their reading. Their reading improved, but it wasn't because of what we taught them. So sometimes it's not a good idea to work on what's broken. And another example I just have here at the bottom, this is just a recent one. About a year ago, a boy had been in Orton Gillingham, which you may all be familiar with, I don't know. It's a reading program that's used quite frequently in schools for kids with dyslexia and whatnot. It's been around 30 years. It's phonological based. It's got a mix of things that go on in this reading program, but it's heavy phonological. So it's perfect, you would think, to fix what's broken in a phonological dyslexic. I had a case of a kid with very poor nonword reading, went through OG for 3 years at his school, 0 gains. We changed the method. Within 1 month, he was at grade level. And I can explain why. Because you can have poor nonword reading, and a school can diagnose you as phonological dyslexic because of your poor nonword reading. There's nothing wrong with your phonology whatsoever. We talked about that. Grade 3 or less, work on the weakness and the strengths. Grade 4 or higher, work on the strengths. Testing is important because every child is so unique. You can't possibly lump them into these categories. An example is the nonword reading. Just because your nonword reading is poor does not mean a phonological program will work for you. So you have to do very thorough testing to understand what's happening with this child to know what to do. And this is what I was saying. You can have poor nonword reading, but phonics programs don't work because your phonology is fine. I'm going to give examples. What's up with that? So here's where we're going to learn something new and interesting. You can have poor nonword reading and have a deficit of visual attention. It has nothing to do with phonology. It's called, remember in the beginning I said we're going to talk about neglect dyslexia? This is what neglect dyslexia is. So we all attend to the right side of space a little bit up until about the age of 6 to 8. Everyone, irrespective of your experience or where you live in the world. Everyone is a little bit more on the right, on the left, and then it goes away. Sometimes it doesn't go away. A lot of children are neglecting the left side of space. This also, which means they're on the right more. It's not that they can't attend to the left or they don't see the left. They're just consciously deciding to be on the right more. They can see what's on the left fine. I'll explain how this works, but we call this neglect of left space. In people with stroke, when you get a deficit in your right hemisphere, which happens to a lot of people, you know how a lot of times our grandparents will have a stroke and they'll lose function on the left side of their body? it's not just motor, but it's visual as well. Visual and motor are very tightly linked in the brain. So you not only might limp on your left side, but you're actually also not attending to the left side. There are people with left neglect dyslexia that's so strong they don't even recognize themselves in the mirror because both halves of their face don't look the same to them. There are people that only shave one side of their face or only eat food on one side of their plate because they're not attending to the left. This is due to stroke. Children have the same form of neglect, although it's not due to stroke. It just has to do with the way their brain developed, and all it has to do is which side of the brain is more strong than the other one. So, sorry, go ahead. You have a question?
No, so it's an attention issue,
it's attention.
Not a perception issue.
Correct.
So the brain is seeing it all. It just says,
well, we'll talk about that because the brain sees it all, but awareness doesn't. Right. So when you do MEG, this is when it gets... Yeah, like this is when it gets, we could talk about this till doomsday, but when you do studies, we know that you can ask someone with neglect, with stroke, you can say, tell me how many letters are in that word, and they'll probably tell you how many. You can even say, what does that word mean? And they may even tell you what it means. And you say, can you read that word? They can't read it, because they have to go to the left to start sounding it out, and they can't, to read out loud, and they can't go to the left. So it's crazy. They know what it means, they know how many letters, but they can't read it. So these are different levels of awareness. So what happens is the brain just looks at a word, and in those split seconds, if your left hemisphere is okay, so people with right hemisphere stroke, their left hemisphere is fine. So what's happening is the left hemisphere is processing the right side of space just fine. But the right hemisphere is slow to process the left. It's not that they don't see it, it's just slow. So when you go to look at something, and it doesn't matter whether it's a word or a car or a building or me, whatever you decide to look at that moment in time, I don't know why it works this way, it just does. Whatever you decide to look at that moment in time, this contralateral processing happens. So if you're looking at, I'm going to draw this. Let's just say you're looking at even a letter. It can be as small as a letter. Let's say you're looking at a B. Someone with neglect, like with stroke, and children do it too without stroke, they look at this B. Let's say the left hemisphere is faster at getting the circle than the right hemisphere is at getting the line, because attention tends to go center slightly right to whatever object you're looking at. So what happens is they'll go, oh, look, they're going to transcribe this for you. They go, oh, look, I see a circle. And then they go, oh, look, I see a line. And you just got a D. Or you'd see, it could be like this. Like, let me give you an example. People with stroke, with right hemisphere stroke, do not go to lefts of words. That's why they can't read non-words. People with right hemisphere stroke cannot read non-words. Almost every single one. It's really crazy. It's very, very prominent. So if I give someone with right hemisphere stroke this word Bleener, this fake word. It's fake words. You have to go to the left, right? I'll say, what does it say? They'll say cleaner. Because they're not attending to over here, so they're going to take a guess based upon what they see. And that's what they see. Where you focus, which is center, slightly right, gets processed by both hemispheres. It's called foveal processing. Where you fixate is bilateral. It's both sides. So the E and the A get processed by both hemispheres. So they're really going to get the middle. But they're not going to get over here, and they're more apt to get this over here, because the right side of the brain is going to get this part of the word. So this is what happens in stroke, and this is what happens in children, not because they have stroke, but because they have a dominance for one side or the other. So conscious attention is going to go wherever it wants to go. So this is just a little drawing that I did years ago to show how fixation works. Those are very rudimentary drawings of brains looking at words and how it goes. And you can see the contralateral processing. So the color of the side of the brain processes that color of side of space and whatnot. Okay, if you get right hemisphere damage, you get left neglect. If you get left hemisphere damage, you get right neglect. It's not as strong. What's weird, and this is a very crazy finding, but every single case, every single one, of left hemisphere damage leads to what we call letter by letter reading. So, in other words, when someone has a stroke on the right side and you give them Bleener, they'll say cleaner. But if a person with a left hemisphere stroke gets this, I give them this, they're going to say, it's going to be letter by letter by letter. It's crazy. I mean, it makes sense because they're now neglecting the right, but for some reason, it's more pronounced. The neglect when you get the left hemisphere damage is stronger, and you only get this letter by letter by letter reading. And when you get kids that are doing that, it's always letter by letter by letter. You got to think about the fact that there could be some left hemisphere stuff going on that is stopping them from learning to read. And if this is really crazy, if you get damage on both sides, so there's a phenomenon called simultaneous nausea. Another word for it is called Balance syndrome. But if you get damage on both sides of your brain, tends to be temporal, occipital areas, but it could be almost anywhere. If you have symmetrical damage on both sides of your brain, these people can only see very short words, and they're neglecting the outsides of all the words. In fact, what's so crazy about it, when you show them pictures of like objects, like if you were to show them a bowl of fruit, they'll only see one piece of fruit at a time. It's crazy. I call it the one object at a time disorder. But it's because there's this whole bowl of fruit, there's all these items, and, you know, the damage on both sides is cutting off the periphery, so they're only able to see fixation. Fovea, which is bilateral, right? Fovea gets both sides. So it bypasses something that has to do with the way the brain works. It's like if the damage on both sides, you're going to see one object at a time, and with reading, sometimes it means the middle letters only. These are all kinds of studies now that just show evidence for neglect in children. This was the first time I saw in print someone admitting non-word reading had anything to do with non-phonology, so I threw it in there because I thought, hey, that's cool. Someone noticed something like that. They said when a right-word attentional bias is present, non-word reading accuracy is directly impaired, even in the absence of a phonological deficit. They weren't describing neglect in this study, but they are describing neglect. They were saying, hey, we had kids with poor non-word reading. They didn't have a phonology deficit, and they had this bias to the right. That's neglect in children right there. It's an example of it.
Is the right word emphasis culturally determined? So
It's not, because you can be Hebrew speaking or English speaking, and it doesn't matter. Everybody has this tendency to be a little more on the right until the age of 6 or 8, and sometimes it doesn't go away. These are examples of, I better speed it up here, but these are examples of, this is how we test for neglect, how we used to test for neglect in chronic populations, chronic neglect, so stroke patients. This is an example of someone who did it in developmental population of children with surface dyslexia. It's showing, basically you say to people with stroke, can you draw me a clock? And they tend to cram all the letters on one side, depending on where the neglect is, because they're not attending to the other side. So this is happening with some dyslexics. The problem with studies like this, the problem with these types of ways of looking at neglect is that, like I said before, it doesn't matter where you look, the neglect moves. So if you decide to focus on the clock as a whole, you're going to neglect the left of the clock. If you decide to focus on a number for a second, you're going to neglect the left of the number. Just depends where you're fixating. So some people see neglect and some people don't when they use these very rudimentary tests for neglect. The best way to test for neglect is to do things like on a computer where you flash lights on both sides really quickly and ask them, what did you see? Oh, I saw one on the right, or I saw one on the left, or I didn't see anything, or, you know, and you can change the speed of these things to see what they see, which is what we do. And that's a better way to test for neglect because it's more subtle. Here's an example. I'm going to show you a test for neglect. This is really rudimentary, but I want you to tell me, I'm going to flick to 2 slides, and I want you to tell me which side you think the line is growing from. So what happens is I'm going to cue you by putting a dot on the screen, and then I'm going to throw a line after it, and it should create an illusion of whether you saw it from the left or the right. Are you ready? Well, that was bad. Try that again. I can't do this with this PowerPoint, but you get the idea, right? So in science, what we do is we'll present a dot, followed with milliseconds later, which I can't do because I'm slow. You'll see a bar, and you ask them which direction did that come from. And then you can cue the other side, and you ask them which direction did that come from. When someone has a bias, they'll tend to think it's coming from one side because they're usually over there. That's an example of a test of neglect. Here's another one. This is one we did in 2006. We would present a circle on the screen. So you're cueing them. You're saying, okay, look, hey, look over here. You put a little circle on the right, and then you either put a circle inside there, where you just cued them, or you put it in the other side. And you want to see, hey, when I cued you, were you able to still see the stuff on the other side, or are you stuck over here? You know, what's going to happen to your attention when we do all these different things, you know, to you? And the answer is, here we have phonological dyslexics, non-phonological, which were sort of surface, kind of not normal readers. These are speeds. These are the reaction times. The lower the bar, the faster they are. These are phonological dyslexics. This is the speed of their right visual field. This is the speed of their left visual field. So you can call it neglect of the left, but not really, right? You almost want to call it over-attending to the right. They don't suck at the left, right? Which is this bar. This is how the speed of the left. They're a little slower than normals, good readers, but they're way faster at processing the right than good readers and other dyslexics because they're on the right a lot, which throws off their attention. I need to say, this is when I say phonological dyslexics, and we don't have time for all this, but I want to say poor non-word reading instead. Okay? Because these are old studies. And I know now that phonological dyslexics, just because you have poor non-word reading doesn't mean you're phonological dyslexic. There's a group that have vision problems versus a group that have phonology problems. So we're talking about people with vision issues here. Letter by letter reading. This is how you can pick it up in a child that you might see at school. A lot of kids cram things over to the left, right? You've seen when they don't put spaces between their words when they write. When you see kids cramming things like that, it's a sign of neglect. It's a sign that they're not attending to the line as a whole, so they don't know how to space things out properly. So this little girl was cramming everything over to the left all the time. These are her scores. Her non-word reading was great because she's on the left a lot, so she can read non-words fine. Her real word reading, there are not a lot of tests of irregular words out there, by the way. Her real word reading is a lot worse because for word reading, you need to look at it as a whole more than sounding it out piecemeal. So her word reading is a lot weaker because she can't see them as wholes. Her verbal IQ really high. Her nonverbal IQ lower. Processing speed has to do with visual scanning and low because she can't scan properly. So here you're seeing visual scanning issues, nonverbal learning problems, great non-word reading. She's a crammer. That's how I can explain it. So I'm just going to turn this off so I can cough here. So if you see kids that don't space their words out properly, it often means that there's a deficit of perceiving, attending to space. There's tons. I'm going to skip a lot of these. Basically, what we can do is I can create neglect in any of you, including myself. All I need to do is put a pulse to your brain and present. I can put a pulse to your right hemisphere. I can put a stimuli on the left, and you will not see it. And I can do the same thing where I can put a pulse on the left side of your brain and present something on the right, and you will not see it. It's called TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation. You can induce neglect in normals. That's how we're so sure about how this stuff works. And I can stimulate both sides of your brain, and nothing happens, which is crazy. It's got to do with the timing of things, right? If I slow down one hemisphere, the other side's going to get what it wants to see. If I slow down the other side's going to get what it wants to see. If I stimulate both, they're both seeing it at the same time, and nothing happens. It's really crazy. You'll see both of them. It's really wild. Okay, so what do we do about all this? This is an important part, and we only have 10 minutes left. First, is it a phonological dyslexic? So do they have poor non-word reading? If they have poor non-word reading, do they also have a deficit of phonology? Is it sound-based? Or is it visual-based? Because poor non-word reading, as you now know, can be due to left neglect. Okay? You cannot read non-words because you have to go read fake words left to right. So if you can't read them, it could be because you can't get to the left. Or it could be because you have a deficit of phonology. You're not learning the sounding out rules. So what you do when kids having a reading problem, you first want to find out, you give them words and non-words. And then, if their non-word reading is poor, say to yourself, is this phonological dyslexia or neglect dyslexia? Okay? And to do that, you're going to test them. Get a neuropsychologist to test them. Is there a nonverbal learning deficit? Or is it an auditory and, sounding deficit? Deficits of sounds and phonology, or is it deficit of vision? There's your clue whether it's phonological or neglect dyslexia. Okay? If non-word reading is amazing, and real word reading is not, it's not phonological dyslexic. It's not left neglect. But if your non-word reading is amazing, but your reading generally is still kind of poor, you could be a surface dyslexic. You're not seeing the words as wholes. You could also be not attending to the right, which affects your fluency, which is kind of neglect of the right. When you're deciding what to do about all this stuff, you want to ask yourself, how old is this kid? Is this grade 3? Is this grade 4? What are their strengths? What has worked or not worked? Right? If someone has deficits of phonology and you put them in OG, that should work, actually. If someone has poor non-word reading and deficits in phonology, and you give them a program to improve that, when they're young, it'll probably work. So Orton Gillingham will probably work for phonological dyslexic as an example. But you got to ask yourself, what have we been doing for this kid? What has been working or not working? How old are they? Maybe we should move on. And I'm not going to work on what's broken. I'm going to work on what they're good at instead. And you leave it alone. This is the 21st century part of the conference. They wanted to make sure being all 21st century. These are all computer programs that can improve what's broken. And I'm happy to post this somewhere online where you can read it. Or there's a memory drive. Someone put your hand up if you have the memory drive I have out there. It's back there. If anybody wants a copy of this PowerPoint, it's back there. Because there's a lot on here about how to fix these issues, okay? These are all computer programs that work on what's broken. Everything can be converted for children now to help them see things better. And adults as well, obviously. This website, it's dyslexiefont.com. You just download the font. You download it to your phone. Everything on your phone will be in dyslexia. Anything on your tablet, anything on your Kindle.
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
When they see words not in dyslexia,
Yeah.
does this help them to...
No, if you're phonological dyslexic with a basis in audiology, you don't hear speech sounds properly, it has nothing to do with that whatsoever. That's why testing is so important. In terms of the prevalence of these types of dyslexia, it's about 50%. About 50% of children with reading problems I even think it's less. I would argue there's more visual issues than phonological. Even though America tends to be on this phonology bandwagon, I don't know why. I'm going to guess, and it's just a guess, I would guess maybe 35 or 40% have deficits of phonology, and the rest are visual-based. So a very high proportion. And not everyone are in these camps. In acquired populations, they absolutely are. You'll get pure forms of surface dyslexia. Like I showed you, the kanji versus kana. You can get brain damage, maintain the ability to read one way, and lose the ability to read the other way. In children, it's a mixed bag. Phonological dyslexics can have both phonological problems and visual problems. And the reason being, you know how I presented tones and showed you how they don't always hear those tones? That's called a temporal processing deficit. It happens in audiology. It happens in vision. It happens in motor. So you can take little pin pricks with phonological dyslexics and prick parts of their arm, and they may only feel one prick when there were two. I can give them motion perception tasks. I didn't put them up here, but we've done motion perception on phonological dyslexics. A lot of them can't see motion illusions like other people because in order to see the illusion, the cells have to refresh very quickly. And when your cells don't refresh quickly, you don't see the illusion. So there are a lot of kids that have mixed. So you might as well use dyslexia. It can't hurt with everybody just in case. And you also do a thorough evaluation to see if there's anything auditorily going on. These are things that are good for everybody. These... Okay, I'm just going to say, just turn this off a second. The best way to teach anyone how to read ever, no matter what your problem, this is the best way to teach anyone how to read. The important thing is when you go to learn how to read, you have to have tools to bring to the task. If you suck at things, you don't have those tools. Everybody has certain tools. Most of us, almost all of us, have certain tools. And those certain tools are knowing English language in this culture. They can speak. If you can speak and you can understand what someone is saying, this is how you teach someone how to read. Okay? You're starting with what they know. You have them tell you a story, very short, 2 lines, 2-line story. If it's a really little kid, it might be something like, I like hockey, hockey is great. Then what you do is you have them memorize their story. I like hockey, hockey is great. They already know what the words are. They've memorized them. There's no guesswork involved here. So there aren't going to be mistakes. They already know what they are. That's the important thing. You don't want people making all kinds of mistakes. They're going to remember the mistakes. They know what the words are. You show them the words. You write them down, 1 on each card. I like hockey. Hockey is great. You put them down. You point to each card. Tell me what this is. I like hockey. Hockey is great. Easy, right? Then what you do, put them down in columns. You're going to take them out of their context. I like hockey. Hockey is great. Mix them all up. Pass out the cards. Now they're pulling them from 6 words, not 5,000 in the English language, not trying to apply all these rules they can't remember or understand. They've got 6 words to remember, and they're going to try to guess what they are. You hand out hockey. Oh, that's hockey. Hand another one. Oh, that's is. They're pulling from 6 words. It helps improve their word recognition. It helps improve their understanding of how sounds work because they're seeing how they're spelled. You're telling them what it is and you're showing them what it is. The only thing they have to know before you do this, they have to know letter sounds and letter combination sounds. Once you get those down, even if they don't, still go for it. But once they know general sounds with letters, kids will figure out how to read all on their own. So then what you do is you take these cards, you put them in a basket. The next day you do a new sentence, new group of sentences. I don't know, summer was fun. We went swimming. Do the same thing. Add the cards to the box. Now you've got a couple of stories in there. At the end of the week, you're going to have maybe 20, 30 cards in there, and they're going to try to remember their stories, and they'll be pulling their guesswork from their stories, not from 5,000 words in the English language, and not from all these rules they don't understand. And that is the best way to teach anyone how to read. And when I show you, like all of these, the reason I have all of these on here for how to teach everyone is because all of these are already telling you what the words are before you learn to read. Read Naturally works like that. Tune into reading. Great for almost every kind of dyslexic because you're basically, it's like you're singing songs and they're showing you what the words are as you're singing them. Reading pens. You can have pens now. You just point to a word. It'll tell you what it is. You can put it on sounding out mode or you can put it on whole word mode and it reads for you. These are the best ways to learn how to read. Reading to your children. Why do you think children, they memorize the books and then they can read them? They already know what the words are. Best way to teach a kid how to read. Kids that are good readers had parents that read to them a lot. And they showed them what the words were. Then recording for the blind and dyslexic. These are audiobooks. These are all audiobooks that you can find online. They're basically telling you what the words are and showing you as you go. And they're fun. And there's pictures and songs. And these are ways that kids can learn to read at home, for homework or at night. And again, you're welcome to get a copy of this PowerPoint to see that. I'm going to speed things up because we're almost done here. There are other ways to remove neglect dyslexia that are pretty interesting. You can wear prism glasses. It makes neglect go away altogether in stroke. You can put prism glasses on. It eliminates neglect 100%. In some children, you put prism glasses on, it eliminates their neglect. In a lot of them, it doesn't. I don't know why. That's the reality. You can change luminance. You can change contrast on your Kindles. You know how you can make it bigger or smaller? You can help get rid of neglect by making the words really big or really small. You can adjust the sizes of things now, and people will read them faster or slower. You can adjust the contrast. Dyslexics of all kinds tend to have contrast sensitivity problems. With Kindles, you can adjust the background. They tend to be more gray in the background and dark gray text. That's better for reading. You can play around with these things, improve reading. And then I was going to do math, but we won't do math. And that's it because I don't want to run into your time. So I don't know. At this point, I'd love for everyone to have a copy of this because you can use it at school. I know we only have maybe a minute or two for questions, but does anybody have any questions you want to throw?
Actually, we started.
Oh, I got 15 minutes.
Yeah, you have 15.
Oh, this is awesome. Okay, sorry. We do. We have 15 whole minutes. So let me just, does anyone want to talk about math or no? Reading Brain wanted me to talk about math, so I added it. Does anybody want that? Okay, make this quick. Yeah, I haven't posted this yet. Okay, I want to show you something for math. Here's the thing for math. I'll try to keep it like 5 minutes so that you have questions, or I can answer your questions. Math, we don't know a lot about math like we know about reading. It hasn't evolved to the same extent. There's a few things that can go wrong with math, and you figure this out in testing. One, reasoning. Some kids can't reason well enough to do math. That changes with age. It does not change much. It changes with age. You're born with what you're born with. It's very difficult to change your ability to reason. If kids have problems reasoning with math, you've got to find another way or do something else because the chances of them improving that reasoning are very small. It could be that they're slightly delayed and then a year or two from now they're going to catch up with that reasoning. But when you test someone's reasoning at the age of 6 and then you test their reasoning again at the age of 14, it's going to be exactly the same. It's not going to change. That's why we don't have remediation programs for reading. For reasoning. It doesn't happen all that often. It's very difficult to improve it. Although a 6-year-old does not reason like a 12-year-old. So your materials have to be age appropriate. So if you can't reason with math, and this is why testing is important, there's not a lot you can do there. There's not a lot you can do. Sometimes it's something else. Sometimes it's weak working memory. Working memory contributes greatly to math. Working memory is how much information can you hold at one time. With math, we do a lot of that in our head. If your working memory is poor, and this is why testing is important, you can 100% improve your working memory, and you can 100% improve your math if it's due to your working memory. Working memory is something that does change a lot, and that's why we have remediation programs for working memory. You can improve how much information that you can hold at one time, which improves all of your thinking generally. Okay? There's a program called CogMed, COGMED, CogMed. It runs between, to purchase it, $900 to $2,500, somewhere in there. You can go to cogmed.com. You can figure out how to purchase it. You need to work with a specialist first who shows you how to use it. So there are people trained in it that will show you. Then they give you the software, and they can monitor you online and see how you're doing. It's a 5-week program to improve your working memory. It's 45 minutes a day, and it comes with 100 sessions to do throughout the year. And we can all benefit from it. I know I could. Yeah, right. Okay, let's talk about age. Age, believe it or not, there's a lot of misconceptions about age and general learning. Here's the thing about age. You'll like this answer. The older we get, the cooler and smarter, believe it or not, and more efficient our brains become. Your brain also gets smaller as you get older. The reason your brain gets smaller when you get older isn't because we're becoming dummies. It's because every single day when you wake up in the morning, thousands of stem cells are born in your brain that can become neurons. If you push yourself, like my mother who does crosswords puzzles all day long, she's addicted to these little like video games. If you push yourself like that, those cells will turn into neurons, and this is how I get kids to do their homework. It works. Tell them this. Those cells turn into neurons, and you make your brain bigger and better, and there's more connections. But when we're older, we're so efficient, and we kind of know a lot already. And so we don't bother. We don't bother pushing ourselves every day because we don't need to. Kids, when you're an infant, you're learning to walk and talk, your whole brain is lit up. And you get tired. Babies sleep a lot because it's so much new information, and these brain cells are growing like mad fire. But, you know, once you're walking and talking, you don't even need any brain hardly to do it. It goes way down here to brainstem. There's like no thought at all. The smarter you get, the less brain you use. There are neurons in the brain called mirror neurons. They're sort of right around here. Some people have them, some people don't. The older we get, the more mirror neurons you should have. If you don't, you could be a sociopath because the way these work is they're sort of like empathy cells. So an example is, a basic example is if I yawn, you're going to probably feel like yawning. The reason is because mirror neurons made you do that. It's because the brain activity that happens in your brain is by watching me yawn, is so similar to your brain actually yawning that you yawn. Your brain doesn't know the difference. With empathy, you can enter a room, and maybe people are all crying. And when you're a little kid, you're looking around, you're like, what's going on? I don't know what's going on. When you're an adult, you go into this room and everyone's crying, you automatically know something's wrong. People are sad. It takes a lot of effort for someone under 3 to figure out mood and emotion to the same level as an adult can. When you're an adult, 1 or 2 cells can read the room. That's it. They're called mirror neurons. One activation of 1 cell, 1, can tell you what is happening. That's very little brain at all. But when you're a kid, your whole brain is trying to figure it out. So the older we get, the smaller our brains get, the more efficient our brains become. And it doesn't mean we're getting dummy. It means we're becoming more efficient. And our brain has rewired itself to be quite amazing. And when you get stroke, when you're older, the damage is more severe than a child because those paths are set and it's harder to relearn them. Yep.
Changes in hippocampus.
That would be memory. And I'm not familiar with the study, but hippocampus is memory. Mirror neurons are in motor areas, sensory motor.
Talking about before with the growing your brain.
Oh, hippocampus is long-term memory. Hippocampus is like when Alzheimer's patients, when they start to become demented, their hippocampus is usually not so bad. They have these long-term memories. Hippocampus is involved in memory. Working memory is different. Working memory is like short-term memory, and it's kind of like RAM on your computer, where you can turn all these programs on. If your RAM is really low, the computer will crash because you can't open that many at once. But if you have powerful, good working memory, you can process a lot of things at one time, which allows you to form new memories. It's what's needed to form new memories. It's not the memories themselves.
What's an interesting campus changed in connectivity?
Yeah. You can definitely alter your brain. You can take parts out of your brain and rewire other parts to do what that one did. So yeah. Okay, thank you. So we got 5 minutes. So for the math thing, working memory is important. Reasoning, we're kind of a little bit out of luck there. That's why testing is important. Working memory can contribute to math problems. I'm going to show you a little video because there's a lot of kids that struggle that you can still help them with their math. So if a child has poor reasoning ability, okay, they're not good reasoners, and I don't know, they can have a lot of ailments, and this will work. I'm going to show you something here.
151 into 2.
302.
112 into 3.
336.
49 into 7.
343.
56 into 6.
336.
118 into 4.
472.
42 into 9.
378.
90 into 7.
19 into 7.
90 into 7.
102.
45 into 8.
360.
128 into 2.
256.
49 into 8.
392.
58. 6 less 7 less 2 add 6. Answer is
61.
36 less 4. 3 less 8 add 7. Answer is
34.
59 less 2 less 3 add 8 add 7. Answer is
69.
35 less 9 4 2 less 4. Answer is
28.
47 2 6 less 9 add 1. Answer is
47.
30.
So you get the idea. So what's happening here, you know those old abacuses where you're just flipping the beads? They're doing that. That's it. They were playing with abacuses for so long that they just got really fast at it. They don't need the abacus anymore. So what's fascinating about the use of the abacus, just using beads and counting with tens, your reasoning skills don't have to be very evolved. Your working memory doesn't even have to be that hot. You just have to know, someone says 8 and you move 8. Someone says minus and you do something else, and they do it in their head, and when they're done doing this in their head, just a motor, they count in their head how many beats, and it's done. These types of motor tasks are great for autistic children. Autistic kids, a lot of them can't talk and they can't write. And when you work with, I wanted to bring a video in and I didn't bring it just because I didn't get approval by the family before I got it too late. And I didn't bring the movie with me. But I have videos of autistic children who could not speak or write, who learned to type like wildflower, and all their thoughts are out on paper, and they're 12 and their dads and moms didn't even know they were capable of thinking all these very complex things. When you do a neuropsychological evaluation and you figure out kids can't manipulate their hands, they can't form letters, they can tap. If someone can do this, that's all they need to do. They don't have to talk to you. They don't have to form a letter on a page. They can tap. If someone can tap, they can learn to do the abacus. If someone can tap, they can learn to type. It's slow going when they're learning, but they need to learn without looking at the keys. It's hard at first because their visual motor is impaired. But once they learn motor memory, they fly. And parents are learning all the stuff that their kids had been learning all of these years and they had no idea that they were learning about. And it's just unbelievable. And then kids can type almost as fast as their thoughts are coming out. Okay, there we go.
I'd like to thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.